Hello and welcome to the Eskrima podcast. My name is Jason Enai. I am an Enian Eskrimador, and I believe this is the 8th episode. I'm only going to count up to 12. After that, I'll just say, hey, I wanted to start this off with, I missed Sunday podcast simply because I took a little bit of vacay time because if you don't know, most days, especially during the weekdays, I have my day job, and then I'm at the same time juggling working on the online website for training as well as the old Patreon site, and I'm also handling normal stuff that everyone has to handle on a regular basis throughout a work day. I usually go home. I might be home for after my commute, which isn't so bad, but still it is a commute, and I might be home for 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. Make it home, then straight to teaching. And I'm usually not done until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And so I usually do 12 to 15 hour days every day of the week. And then on Saturdays, it's lately been 8 a.m. training and I'm not done until 4 p.m. on Saturdays. So Sunday's my day off. Was going to do it then last Sunday, but I decided to go to take some time off and get by the ocean and recharge. So today is Monday, and I only tell this by way of saying that remember that rest is part of training too. It took a long time for me to really learn this, but with all the training I do, even when my father was around, I was teaching 5 classes a week, and I was split between teaching in Santa Cruz and teaching in Campbell's South Bay area. At the time, my father wasn't really teaching, and most of the people that want to say that they're been tried and true weren't all teaching either. So it was myself, and I had my sister in supporting me, and that was a really good time of development for both myself and her, as she went from senior student to Katulungan Guru, which is the first instructor rank. When I became Katulungan Guru, at the time it was still used as assistant instructor. However, I did not like that and had a conversation with my father with regards to that, because I wasn't assisting anyone. I was in fact really the only one dedicated to teaching on a regular basis on the West Coast. Everyone else was kind of dancing in the city or drinking beers and watching the 49ers. I have no idea what they were doing, but they weren't training. They didn't have regular classes. They had no commitment to their students, if they even had students, right? Not in terms of Eskrima, at least, let alone the United system of Eskrima. So, through all that training and teaching and learning that what it does to myself, what it does to relationships and things like that, I learned that it's important to take some time, even just a little bit of time away once in a while, at least for yourself, if not for others. Right? So I did that yesterday and the day before after I finished teaching. Took some time off, recharged. That was great. Did a lot for me. I can't believe it. I actually slept probably, I think I had a 9 to 12 hour sleep, which as I've gotten older seems to be exceedingly more difficult to get consistent sleep. Moving on though, this brings me to my subject, however, of instruction, what it takes to be a good instructor, or what we do to develop a student. I started teaching in the early 90s. Even before I became a Katulungan Guru, I was a lead student or a senior student. I can't remember what my father referred to me as, to let me teach introductory lessons at the school that he had at one time. And during that time, I had been, I guess, educated by people like a guy by the name of Scott out in Wisconsin, and another guy in the north, Washington area, master instructor who owned a Taekwondo school, and a couple others that my father put me in front of to learn how they were running their school, because at the time, the people that were managing my father's school couldn't manage to sign up a single human being. So they still teach now today, and I don't even know how they get students, like, honestly, because they couldn't even manage to get a phone call out and do any of those things. Hopefully they changed, right? So he puts me into these schools, has me stay with him, at least the one in Wisconsin, and then also, visit and, train with them for a weekend here and there, just to learn what they're doing. And I was able to, through what I learned and what I put into place and doing the work, was able to increase the business at that school that my dad had, I think by like 30-40% in 11 months, 10 months, something like that. Unfortunately, that was enough for my dad. He didn't really want to do it. Successful, it was actually in the black by the time I was done in terms of revenue, but he was done. And so that school closed. And I was still teaching. So I taught in Los Gatos out of the home that I grew up in. Eventually, my sister and I were able to secure training at a fencing school for a while. We went to a community center, did the normal thing that a lot of martial arts instructors do, and had a pretty big following of people. Classes were in the 20 to almost 40 people per class, 2 to 3 times a week in the San Jose, Campbell, Saratoga, Los Gatos area, which is a South Bay area of Silicon Valley. And then I had, towards the end, when I moved up into the mountains myself, I think I had like 10 or 15 students that I would teach. And in that time, I also didn't really advertise. I was just there teaching some of the top level people, some family people that, like I was teaching my cousin Deke, who'd been around since the very beginning. His mother was the one that suggested to my father to learn from Uncle Max, as they called him at the time. So as I was developing as an instructor, I gotta say, I used modeling, and I used pain, and I used fear to motivate my students. So I'd model them with the techniques, show them, physically move through the technique with them, modeling, which is not the most sophisticated teaching methodology. And while I still use modeling today, I don't use it to teach. I use it for some other effects that are more about applied psychology than I do anything else, right? I use a lot more psychology, and I use a lot more neuroscience and other theory, teaching and learning theory, sometimes called behavioral shaping, in order to teach today. But then, it was pretty much, I'm going to hit you, and you better do it right, otherwise it's going to hurt. Or if you don't do this right, I'm just going to have to do it harder and faster, since you can't seem to do it slow and correct. Maybe if I show you how badly you're doing it through speed and power, then, and I understood that invoked a sense of fear in my students, and it was effective, very effective. I turned out some very effective students that could block, could perform well under the drills that we had that determined or were indicators of any kind of success or skill. I also lost a lot of students. The attrition rate for students was a little bit higher because, seeing that kind of training, and maybe you needed it as a student because you were afraid of being attacked or something like that, but it wasn't your cup of tea. You had to kind of be really invested in the training. You had to be okay with a little bit of pain and violence, if you will, in the training, which I think is fine, right, for a certain type of student, a certain type of training. But at the same time, if your student that comes to you is looking for a way to build their confidence, a way to learn what maybe you might call courage is about, so that they could handle a bully or be able to withstand an attack because they are concerned for their safety. That approach isn't always the greatest approach. Effective to a degree, but also ineffective as well. And so my teaching methodologies have obviously changed. Although I will say this, if I notice that I'm not getting through to a student, I might use that methodology again. A bit more refined, I hope. Excuse me. A bit more refined, I hope. However, still the same kinds of things. The thing I liked about that old way of training is that the student had to be a lot more invested in the lesson, more invested in the training. They had a little bit of skin in the game, as you will. So there is an advantage to that. And honestly, when you get to what we would call an advanced student, third level, we do train that way still. But in the beginning, as I'm trying to make someone who can just basically defend themselves and also is beyond that just a good practitioner of the Filipino martial arts, so that they can intelligently talk about it. They know the difference between it and other forms of martial arts, and ideally they know the differences between Inayan's system of Eskrima and any other Filipino martial arts, and why that's better in some ways and not as good in other ways, because no art is complete in terms of all the ways it could be. The Inayan system of Eskrima is complete, at least in terms of the way that we approach physical altercation, right? I often tell my students now, I'm like, you're not here to become good at this drill. You're not here to become good at this technique, or any drill, or any technique, or any form, or Karenza, or Saya, or whatever term you'd like to use for the martial dance. What Bruce Lee would call martial despair, or organized despair, actually. You'd call it organized despair. Not good there. Not here to be good at that. It is quite possible that you will be good at these things as you practice them, in order for you to be good at the thing that we're actually trying to deal with, which is conflict. You're here to deal with conflict, to learn how to deal with and manage the psychological aspects of conflict, the physiological aspects and consequences of conflict, and of course the very physical form of fighting, right? And the reason why I tell the students that is, my personal experience and some of my students' experiences, well, they were able to defend themselves in a real life altercation, wouldn't necessarily be something that we would cover in class. Did the thing that we do come from our understanding garnered from going to class? 100%. Is it something that we would want to repeat? Not necessarily, unless we're just relating the anecdote of the fight itself. It is our proficiency and our ability to deal with an unrehearsed attack, an unrehearsed type of defense, an unrehearsed context or scenario. That is what we're trying to be good at, right? Not, do you do technique A, B, and C correctly? Now I also, put a caveat in there, like, if you can't do this technique slow, you can't do it at all. And if you can't do it fast, you can't do it in reflex training. What makes you think you're able to defend yourself in an unrehearsed training when you don't know what's going to happen? Here you know what's happening, you know what you're supposed to do, you know when it's going to happen, you might even know what intensity, how hard or how fast it's going to go, and you still can't defend yourself, we might have some problems, right? So, it's not just a black and white thing. There is, some gradients of gray in there that we are trying to navigate as we get there. But ultimately, as I teach students, utilizing not just modeling pain and fear, but other methods today, right? I am always looking from the point of view of empirical knowledge is more valuable than a calcified, rehearsed, organized despair. That while something may not be correct, it can still work, is a useful observation, right? Ultimately, I don't care if my students do the techniques correctly. I just want them to be like Jacob, or like Charlie, or like Matt, or like Gary, and so many other people, and myself, who've been in all kinds of altercations, and be able to come back to class the next day, the next week, and be like, oh, check it out, this happened, and I was able to do X, Y, or Z, right? That's much more useful than, wow, your technique is so superior, it moves so clear in the air with no one fighting against you. Like, you're amazing. You must be a good martial artist. Very good at the aesthetics, for sure. For sure, we can't deny that. But we got to remember that martial arts is the ability to thrive in adversity, right? So, as I teach students now, and I'm trying to make them better, right, and uplift them. Remember, the guru's title means to uplift, right? I am trying to get them to be able to utilize their movement in a way that allows them to walk away from an altercation, and also metaphorically use the training to put them through a controlled form of adversity, so that when they come up against, an upset partner, or an argument with a sibling or some other family member, or difficulty at work, and there's some part of it where it requires you to stand up and speak out, that you can do that with control, that you can do that with an exacting manner that allows you to achieve the goal that you want, the positive outcome, and you're okay with it, right? That's what martial arts is supposed to be for, right? And it starts with building up your confidence through the training, and it starts with building up your self-esteem through the training. But it is not predicated upon whether you do it right, in terms of like, your foot was just in the right place, your weight is just in the right place, you stepped with the correct foot, you clearly know right from left. Although we look for that in training, right? Your right and your other right, and the right that's right, as opposed to your right and your left, right? If you're trying to look for all that stuff in training, that's fine, totally fine. But when it comes down to it, if my student tells me, hey, Suro, this guy, we were at the ice cream shop and he was clearly drunk, and he was starting to be upset, and he put hands on someone, so I interjected, and he swung at me, and I blocked, but like I was in the wrong place, and so I slipped a little bit, but I was able to stop, and I did the hand, and I wish I'd done it better. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? You're standing in front of me, I don't see a bruise on your face, and you just told me that you were able to defend. What happened next? Did you take him outside? And the guy like, yeah. Did you get in trouble? And I'll be like, no, I couldn't do anything too crazy. My kids were there. And then it sounds like you were successful, right? And now that's a hypothetical situation, but that's a lot like what the conversations are about. It's like, if we're trying to make someone good isn't whether or not they can pass a test and wear a new color around their waist, right? Or a new medallion in terms of an Eskrima on their neck. Good is they were able to use what's there in a meaningful way. We strive for meaning in our martial arts eventually. Now, if you're going to come to martial arts, you're going to train for a month, a year, 6 months, something like that, and you walk away able to defend yourself, and you can tell people that you did Filipino martial arts or some kind of martial arts, great, that's fine. I'm actually not talking about that student. I'm talking about the student that's really trying to invest in themselves, that they find the thing that we're doing here to be important, and it's not just a hobby or an activity, but they understand and are willing to undergo that transformation to becoming something else, something a little bit different than the average bear, right? And in that case, and in that context, whether they do it right isn't important, right? My dad used to use a lot of handicapping and imposed limitations and cognitive challenges under duress to teach people, and I still use those things today. But it wasn't so that I could do math problems while I was trying to defend myself against a knife. That's not what it was for, right? The idea was that, can you pay attention while someone's attacking you, and look and notice other things around you and make critical decisions, right? And whether you did the technique right or wrong doesn't matter. It's that ability to think critically that's important, right? And how do we develop that in a student? And that's what we do so that they can come back and say, hey, yeah, it was kind of a weird technique, didn't work so well, but it was 2 guys and I was able to, make it so that I was only fighting 1 guy at a time, and I got a bruise and a couple scratches on my arms and stuff like that, but they left. They didn't want to fight anymore. That's a great story. Not very different than what Matt told me when he told me he got jumped by 3 people, right? Great story. Tells me that whatever we were able to develop, the work that he did on himself and the time that he gave to class, he had that dedication, was adequate to making sure that he didn't end up getting robbed, right? Having to go to the hospital, or worse, right? And that it didn't involve getting in trouble with the authorities either, because he, maybe went too far. Those are good things too, because that critical thinking and paying attention also is when you need to be able to decide when you've done enough, had enough, right? So I look at all these things that I've gone through and trying to develop and determine when I'm successful with a student, to determine how well I've accomplished my job as the one who's supposed to be uplifting this person, so that they can be confident, that they can have an assurance in themselves that they can deal with something that would be difficult for most people to deal with, and should be difficult, because that shouldn't be the normal way of life, that you're dealing with confrontation all the time, right? That's not an ideal situation in society. So us as martial arts instructors, no matter what style we teach, should be striving to make someone capable. They don't have to do it perfect, right? That's for senior students that are going to become instructors, etc. Perfection is what we're looking for out of them, so that they can teach and continue to uplift others without deteriorating the quality of the art and of the curriculum, right? Which is a different consideration than simply making a student go through a number of drills and helping them develop the right skills and mindset in order to deal with conflict, which is ultimately what we're here for. And all the other stuff, the life skills and everything else comes along with that, with some authenticity and some resilience, naturally as a course of the training, right? So that's some of my reflections as to what it takes to develop a student, and what it was like when I started. I think it was probably 1990, 91. Became a guru in 1992, and it's 2023 now. Well, that's the end of this podcast. I'll see you guys on the training floor soon. Remember, I'd love to see you at the memorial. Bye now.